multiple parties fight for political power and everyone voting on them as the only path to salvation to the long-suffering developing
This is
world.
Eric Lee, a Shanghai
buy the
entrepreneur,
prospectus are destined for
educated
success.
in
Those
America,
who do not
and
are
typical
doomed
of
to
a
fail.
new, confident,
But this time,
outspoken
the Chinese didn't
political
buy it.
class.
Now, in China, there are a lot of problems, but at the moment, the Chinese, the party state, has proven an extraordinary ability to change. I mean, I make the joke how in America, you can change political parties, but you can't change the policies. In China, you cannot change the party, but you can change policies. So in the 65 or 66 years, China is being run by one single party, yet the political changes that have taken place in China in this past 66 years have been wider and broader and greater than probably any other major country in modern memory.
So in that time, China ceased to be communist. Is that what you're saying?
Well, China is a market economy, and it's a vibrant market economy, but it is not a capitalist country. Here's why. There's no way a group of billionaires could control the Politburo as billionaires control American policymaking. So in China, you have a vibrant market economy, but capital does not rise above political authority. Capital does not have enshrined rights. In America, capital, the interest of capital and capital itself has risen above the American nation. The political authority cannot check the power of capital. And that's why America is a capitalist country, but China is not.
This is the ironic title of a best-selling book by Zhang Lizhi, a journalist and critic who lives in Beijing.
Many Americans imagine that the Chinese people live a miserable, repressed life with no freedom whatsoever. That's not quite true. If you speak to many ordinary Chinese people, they will tell you they feel their life are quite free. Some 500 million people being lifted out of poverty, and some would say probably 600 million people. That's a great achievement. For many Americans, the yellow peril has never left them. I think there's a fear about China. Of course, there's a fear of China's rapid rise, but it also has a lot to do with China's the label as a communist state.
China's objectives are modest. Compare with their weight. They're not trying to run the world. They're not even trying to run Asia Pacific. I think they want to keep America from dominating the Asia Pacific. So they have what they believe is their rightful place in Asia Pacific because of long civilization, long history, and their size. So their objectives are really modest compared with their capacity.
The wealth, the new wealth in China, they often say this is the product of self-made entrepreneurial skill. Yeah. But is it not also the product of the exploitation of people at the bottom? What are known in China as migrants, but they're not really migrants, they're Chinese.
If you really, go to talk to these migrant workers, you will find quite surprisingly, over the past 5 to 7 years, they have experienced a greater income increase than any other social groups. China is not a class society.
But China is a class society. These are the homes of migrant workers, people who build and service the new China. Here it's not uncommon for 3 families to share one tiny flat.
You know, you would associate a socialist country with equality, but unfortunately, since the reform has started, China has become one of the most unequal societies in the world. The income gap is widening. Government, I feel, have retreated some of the responsibilities, left the market to take over, but the market does not always treat women kindly. Some private companies, they would just refuse to hire child-bearing age women. And sometimes when women become pregnant, they will sack them because they don't want to pay the maternity leave. And in fact, the income gap has grown much bigger between men and women.
Your old boss, Deng Xiaoping, presided over the bloodshed in Tiananmen Square. What would you say to the survivors of Tiananmen Square? Because so many of those did fight for what they saw as democratic change in China.
In 1989, there were two political forces. One was those represented by the Chinese students. Their hero was Mikhail Gorbachev, who happened to be in Beijing.
Mm-hmm.
Their slogan was, Soviet Union's today, China's tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea was political reform first, other reform second. Otherwise, China would be hopeless. Yeah. And Deng's message was the opposite. He thought Gorbachev was an idiot. Yeah. He thought, China must have economic reform first, other reform second. This priority must be set clearly. Unfortunately, at that particular moment in 1989, the two political forces could not reach a compromise. So definitely a tragedy occurred. Yeah.
It was more than a tragedy. It was a massacre, of which the memory remains a raw presence in modern China.
Why does the Chinese state still fear the few who speak out? And I'm thinking of
Liu Xiaobo.
exactly. I mean, this man won the Nobel Peace Prize, and he's in prison.
He's violating Chinese law, by a big margin. So actually the freedom of expression, similar views are aired by many people, but he's really going to the extreme.
Liu Xiaobo challenged the government to implement democratic reforms and has spent a total of 13 years in prison.
Why can't a confident China accept a criticism like this?
So Nobel Peace Committee makes huge mistake. They owe the Chinese an explanation. If you cross the line, you violate the constitution, you violate so many laws, you should be punished.
And yet in China today, the spirit of protest and dissent lives on in different forms. In 2015, strikes and community protests and activism reached record levels. This resistance is seldom reported in the West.
So there are lots of protests in China. Typically, for example, land being grabbed by officials for commercial development, and the farmers are not being compensated properly. Yeah. But the farmers now know more aware of their rights, so they protest. Or young workers from the factory, they demand a better wage or better working condition. But many of the protests, they are economic driven, not political driven. They are regional, not nationwide. So this kind of things will unlikely develop into a real movement, or so-called, you call that revolution.
Yeah. So the Mao's revolution was the last revolution?
Well, never say never.
The Japanese island of Okinawa is occupied by 32 military installations. From here, the United States has attacked Korea, Vietnam, Cambodia, Afghanistan, Iraq, The sky is full of planes and helicopters. Wherever people go, they are fenced in and told to keep out. Okinawa is the front line of a beckoning war with China. Aged 87, Fumiko Shimabukuro is one of the leaders of a non-violent resistance that's challenging Washington's pivot to Asia. Fumiko is a survivor. A quarter of the civilians on the island were killed in the American invasion in 1945, and a fear of war has been passed through the generations. Today, those who witness these horrors live in a place of extraordinary beauty, surrounded by coral reefs and a unique marine life. It was here in Hanoko Bay that the survivors of World War II sought refuge, and it's this they're now fighting to save. It's an epic struggle that pits these island people against the greatest military power on Earth.
This is the office of a former governor of Okinawa, Oto Masahide. What he has done is create not so much a museum, but an appeal to the outside world to understand the resistance in Okinawa, to understand the suffering, to read its hidden history. It begins in 1945 when the Americans invaded. Here is General MacArthur arriving in Okinawa.
A second invasion happened 10 years later in what became known as the Bulldozers and Bayonets campaign. American forces seized prime agricultural land, burned farmhouses, and killed livestock. The dispossessed people of Okinawa marched the length of Japan, appealing for help.
This wall is devoted to a resistance in Okinawa that never ceases. Everywhere people go on the island, they are confronted by this sign. It tells them they must not go past this fence topped with barbed wire. These fences run like great ribbons across the island, and the bases themselves cut swathes across Okinawa. But all around them are people with this continuing demonstration, this continuing resistance. And they have a message. It's people of the world. Watch what Japan and the US are doing. Don't let them force the bases on Okinawa.
そして沖縄はずっと戦後ずっと基地はもうこれ以上の基地負担は嫌だと言ってきたことを日本政府はアメリカに対してはっきりものを言っていない。 アメリカにもいい顔、沖縄にもいい顔してる。だからそれに対して腹が立ってちゃんとアメリカに物を言ってくれという気持ちでいます。まあだからここにジュゴンの保護区を作るためにはここに基地があったらできません。だからその基地はですね、国がもたらされてくるという民話があります。でその民話の中にジュゴンがですね、担い家内の幸からその幸を担い家内からその死者をですねがやってくるというふうに言われています。その担い家内から死者を連れてくる時にですね、ジュゴンの背中に乗ってくるというふうに言われているんですね。
All this will be lost when much of the bay becomes concrete runways for bombers at Camp Schwab, the huge US Marine base behind this fence. In 2014, Okinawa elected a new governor, Takeshi Onaga, who won by a landslide on one issue, stopping the new base at Anoka. This was election night outside the American base at Camp Schwab.
あ、明日見です。こんばんは。はい。
ありがとう。ありがとう。ありがとう。やった
勝利。なんとも言えない涙が出てきました。自分たちが頑張った分、でもね、これからその基地がなくなるまで私は頑張りたいと思っています。本当に今日は生きていてよかったと思います。はい。We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, me in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday.
The New Year's celebration of their victory was bittersweet. The government in Tokyo resented this unprecedented challenge to its authority. The issue is now in the Japanese courts. Japan's Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe, has also made clear that with the backing of his powerful patron America, he wants to reawaken Japanese nationalism and reclaim its military power. While we were filming this ceremony outside the base, on a day when people paid respect to their departed loved ones, giant American helicopters circled above us, intimidating as always. The threat of these low-flying aircraft is a constant presence in Okinawa. Teachers often can't teach because of the noise and the fear. This was the carnage when an American fighter crashed into a primary school after the pilot had ejected to safety. Haru Akira, age 7, was terribly burned.
これは10時半頃かな。それでメソールだったからマスターサードンかな、その方が石川に教授って時落ちていますので宮森校に行ったんだけど、どこにいるか分からなかったんですよ、その当時。でそれ人から「あきらくんは病院中部病院に行ったよ」という人が「あきらはあっちにいますよ」と言ってそれして行ったから 焼けているようにして、
やけど。
焼けて、もう一目見るだけでも苦しくても全くヤギさんが焼き焦げている状態でした。それ話したくないですよね。
Akira suffered throughout his youth and died from his injuries, aged 21. Another tragedy waits to happen on Okinawa. US military aircraft have been involved in 44 accidents on the island. The latest threat is this hybrid plane, the Osprey, notorious for its safety issues. Wherever the military is based in Asia, there is a relationship with local people, especially women, that often breeds resentment. In Okinawa, this resentment ignited a riot in 1970. Scores of American GIs were pulled from their cars, which were set alight. For Washington and its compliant ally in Tokyo, it's this kind of insurrection that they fear. During the making of this film, a young woman was raped and murdered, allegedly by an American military contractor from one of the bases. It was the latest of thousands of cases of violence, and it brought massive crowds into the streets, demanding an end to the military occupation of their country. This is a Mace missile, designed to carry a nuclear warhead. During the Cold War, the United States secretly installed nuclear weapons at this launch pad in Okinawa. Most of them were aimed at China. Today, the nuclear missile site is run by a Buddhist organization, the Soka Gakkai, as a peace museum.
In 1962, the atomic weapons loaded on the missile was almost launched.
They're almost launched.
Yeah, according to the spokesman of this military base, said they were ordered to prepare, then received second order to stop it.
One of the American servicemen whose job was to fire the Mace missiles has since revealed that China was a nuclear target during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962.
We were told that we had to launch all the missiles, but we only had one missile headed towards Russia, and we did not see why we should have to involve the other countries. The captain suggested that everybody crack the doors open, so it would take less time to launch a missile if the doors were cracked open.
One of the launch crews was on the point of firing their missiles when a duty officer suspected the order was false.
The launch officer on the B side was told to send 2 men over there with 45s and to shoot anybody that tried to launch until the situation was resolved. And it would only take like 15, 20 seconds to run the distance between the two command centers. So those 2 men kept that whole crew at bay while we made a decision as what to do. And it wasn't very long, maybe 2 or 3 seconds later, where a very nervous major came over the intercom issuing the stand down order. And then we just kind of looked at each other like we could have exterminated the whole planet.
The major who had given the launch order was quietly court-martialed and dismissed from the Air Force.
That morning is just as familiar to me and as clear as yesterday morning is. And this is 53 years later. And how clear blue the sky was. And it was just some very light clouds. And there was a perfect breeze blowing and a perfect temperature. I did not know what the temperature was, but it just felt perfect. And we were all just kind of taking it in and taking in the smell of the air and the sea and the land mixture together, and everything smells so beautiful.
This is very interesting because it shows the cities in China where these MACE missiles were aimed at.
Yes.
Which ones do we have here?
This is Okinawa Island. So within 2,000 kilometers, you find Peking or Beijing, Xi'an, UK, and Hong Kong, Shanghai, Taiwan, Taipei, and Pyongyang, North Korea, within the range of missile.
This is the work of the Okinawan sculptor Kinjo Minoru. It's a tribute to the suffering and resistance of the people of this island. More than 1,000 miles away, on the Korean island of Jeju, these symbols of struggle are hauntingly similar. The work of Korean sculptor Ko Gil-chun represents another fight of island people for freedom. A semi-tropical sanctuary of unusual beauty, Jeju Island is a World Heritage Site. The government of South Korea declared it an island of world peace. But on this island of peace has been built one of the most provocative military bases in the world, less than 400 miles from Shanghai. Like Okinawa and the Marshall Islands, this is America's front line in its so-called pivot to Asia. Here in once unspoiled Ganjung village, the South Korean Navy has built a base for American aircraft carriers, nuclear submarines, and destroyers equipped with the Aegis ballistic missile aimed at China's defenses. China's lifelines to the world in oil, trade, resources depend on shipping that comes through choke points like this.
The U.S. pivot into the Asia-Pacific is really intended to create the ability to put a loaded gun to the head of China and say, you know, you will do as we say. Otherwise, we will be able to restrict, we will be able to shut down, choke off your importation of oil and other resources.
For 9 years, every day, often twice a day, these Catholic priests have staged a mass that blocks the gates of the new military base on Jeju Island. In a country where political demonstrations can be easily banned, unlike powerful religions, the tactic has produced this spectacle of resistance. Father Moon Jong-hoon has led the fight to stop the base being built and several times suffered serious injury.
I sing 4 songs every day, before Mass, during the Mass, at the end of the Mass, and the end of the Rosary.
Yeah.
The content of the song is very beautiful. The writer and the composer is the musician from this island. So I love him very much. And he gave me the song that I practiced. And I became a master to sing that song because I practice every day.
Well, you sing it with such passion.
Sometimes we just wait typhoon, typhoon struck.
Do you sing then? Do you have a mass when the typhoon strikes?
Oh yes, during this, no exception.
What will happen if this base becomes operational?
They have destroyed the environment, destroyed the life of villagers. No, we should be witness of that oppression and violence, you know.
Why do they do it?
Well, they'd like to rule the Pacific area, whole area, right? They'd like to make China isolated in this globe.
Yeah.
You know? It means U.S. government want to be emperor of this world.
Meanwhile, a Quaker called Mr. O joins them with his own ritual of protest, accompanied by an artist called Wildflower.
오초근 선생님이 삼보일배를 하다 보면 이렇게 바닥에 숙여야 되잖아요. 그래서 차들이 올 때 못 볼 수 있어요. 매우 위험하죠. 그래서 제가 뒤에서 좀 눈에 띄게 이렇게 하고 있으면 그런 교통사고를 막을 수도 있고요. 저도 제 바느질이 명상이라고 생각하거든요. 실제로 그 뇌파가 명상할 때 거의 비슷해요. 바느질할 때. 저는 저 해군기지가 명백하게 미국의 전쟁기지라고 생각해요. 그래서 대칠과 더불어서 우리나라 한반도 남쪽, 전쪽, 서쪽으로 미군 기지가 들어있어요. 그래서 저는 이 제주가 마지막 이 이 서해안 쪽으로 전쟁 벨트를 지었는데 그 벨트의 맨 마지막이라 생각을 해요. 그 당연히 이거는 중국이 겨냥하고 있기 때문에 중국과의 분쟁 또는 이쪽 동북아의 평화를 정말 위협할 수 있는 그런 기지라서 이게 가장 큰 위험이라고 생각을 해요.
This is the center of an empire that never speaks its name, whose power is represented in this extraordinary world map of American military bases. "4,000 bases in the United States, almost 1,000 bases spread across every continent."
The archipelago of empire, the bases that we have around the world, hidden in plain sight, are the real territory of our empire. But at the same time, we maintain independent governments in Japan or South Korea or Germany. They don't have autonomy when it comes to foreign policy. So it's a very sophisticated and effective system whereby we pat ourselves on the back for helping to midwife democracy in Japan and Germany and South Korea and various other places, while keeping the lid on in that we don't know what these countries would do if they were fully independent. And the beauty of this system is that most people pay no attention to it at all. They think it's just a natural occurrence to have 50,000 American troops in Japan.
There's no country that has better anti-imperial cred than the United States, and we are not trying to recreate the glories of the British Empire. We're arguing that the world is round. We have a global policy, and all nations have global rights.
No ocean has ever been dominated the way the U.S. dominates the Pacific. Navy and Air Force. They claim in the Pearl Harbor headquarters of the Pacific Command, they claim to be responsible for 52% of the Earth's surface. And when you look at their logo, it shows an eagle over the Aleutian Islands with one tailon coming down somewhere near Seattle and the other coming down right over Beijing. So Beijing looks at a network of bases, a real archipelago of empire that's been built up since the Korean War.
You have had, and still have, an arc of bases that start in Australia and go through the Pacific.
We have no bases in Australia.
You have Pine Gap, you have Darwin, and you have a new facility in Western Australia.
No, to speak precisely, we have no military bases in Australia. What we do is operate with and in Australian bases.
Yeah.
But we're not in the basing business nowadays.
There's a growing collection of what are referred to as lily pad bases. These are bases that have typically 200-300 troops, no family members, very few amenities, and are often quite secretive. They're bases that are frequently constructed within a foreign country's base to disguise it, and generally are not referred to as bases.
Many of these bases have been set up to combat China's worldwide economic influence. From these bases, the United States operates a secret army in 147 countries.
If you're going to be a free country rather than give in to every gangster regime in the world, you're going to have to take a risk, because those gangsters, they want to eliminate good people in the world so they can and in China they want to dominate all of the Far East. They want to dominate, just like Japan wanted to before World War II. Their goal was to dominate that part of the world. Today, because there has been no political reform in Beijing, these guys want to dominate a huge chunk of the planet.
Twilight struggle.
Andrew Kurpenovich served on America's National Defense Panel. He's a military strategist and war planner. You've written that airstrikes and naval blockades have a role to play in punishing China. You've described the need for sea mines. You've described the need for special forces, US special forces, and missiles placed in islands. This sounds like a preparation for war.
Our first president, George Washington, said, if you want peace, prepare for war. And essentially, what the United States is doing, again, is responding to provocative behavior on the part of China. And just as we did in the Cold War, the idea was to have a position of military strength such that your adversaries were not tempted to act in aggressive ways or try and employ coercion to get their way.
I mean, just last week, the US Navy sent a guided missile destroyer into the Spratly Islands and South China Sea. And what was different about this, I think, was that Chinese fighters scrambled. That sounds like an escalator.
Well, again, from an American perspective, the escalation was the Chinese beginning to militarize these islands in the first place, moving its military capabilities down into that region, engaging in provocative behavior against the commercial activities and military forces of other minor countries in the region that have claim to those islands. So it's a response to Chinese intimidation.
Excuse me, how is commerce being intimidated in the South China Sea?
There have been no military forces, no military bases there. The Chinese...
Except the United States military base.
Not in the South China Sea, and not even in the Philippines, because the United States withdrew its forces in the Philippines.
But the United States is back in the Philippines.
The Philippines and the United States have announced 5 different locations scattered all throughout the Philippines where U.S. troops will be stationed on a rotational basis.
This threat to China from yet more U.S. bases on its doorstep was not an issue when an arbitration tribunal ruled against China's claims to the strategic Spratly Islands in the South China Sea. In 2015, the U.S. Navy rehearsed a blockade that would cut China's lifelines of oil and trade and raw materials. The danger of confrontation grows by the day. The US Navy is on the doorstep of China, regardless of disputed islands, and is there with low-draft ships, planes, battle groups. It's right on the doorstep. What if Chinese ships, what if the equivalent was off California?
Well, John, we ask ourselves that question regularly, and it's important to put yourself in the other guy's shoes.
Yeah.
So, look, we don't operate in the Pacific in an effort to scare China, to contain China, to backfoot China. Our operations and our presence, first of all, is warmly welcomed by the vast majority of the coastal states. But secondly, is fully accepted by the Chinese. Time after time.
Is it, excuse me, is it fully accepted?
Yes.
My impression.
By their words. The Chinese
My impression
leaders,
is that they're scared. And this is what they're scared of. A noose of bases right around China. Missiles, bombers, drones, warships. A provocation of war.
Today, I state clearly and with conviction America's commitment to seek the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons.
Under Obama, nuclear warhead spending has risen higher than under any president since the end of the Cold War.
It's all a magician's show, because at the same time that Obama is talking about that, not only is he spending $1 trillion to modernize U.S. nuclear forces, but he's deploying these missile defense systems to encircle Russia and China, which makes it impossible to get rid of nuclear weapons in that climate.
Everybody wants to look like they're tough. See, I got to be tough. I got to show you, I'm not afraid of doing anything military. I'm not afraid of threatening. I'm a hairy-chested gorilla. And, you know, and you don't want to look like you're weak. So what you do is you talk more and more aggressively, and if you don't want to do it yourself, because you maybe think it doesn't look very presidential, you let somebody under you do the talking. And we have gotten into a state, the United States has gotten into a situation where there's a lot of military, saber rattling, and it's really being orchestrated from the top.
Yeah. This seems incredibly dangerous, all of this.
That's an understatement, I think, but I agree.
Yeah.
When you routinely plan for mass murder, you become conditioned to it. That's what this is. We accept it. Oh yeah, we have nuclear weapons.
The Defense Secretary, he's just announced that there will be warships and special forces and planes sent to the Philippines, and the Wall Street Journal has described this as the vanguard of a major US presence in Southeast Asia. That sounds like...
Where does this end? What's the purpose? I mean, where are we going to stop this process before it starts a war? And then if the war starts, where does that end? The scientific studies that I teach by the scientists that predict that the Earth can be made essentially uninhabitable from nuclear war, the scientists have been begging the Obama administration, well, they wouldn't say begging, but they've made multiple requests to meet with them and discuss these predictions because they're peer-reviewed studies, and they've been turned down over and over again. They've been peripherally told that, well, we don't think the long-term environmental consequences of nuclear war are all that important if the immediate effects of nuclear war don't stop it. But the long-term environmental consequences of nuclear war are liable to wipe out the human race.
In one exchange, nuclear exchange between the US and China, what could be the consequences?
Well, let me just give you an example of what one Chinese 4 or 5 megaton warhead would do to a city in the United States. If it got through, the detonation of that weapon over a city would instantly ignite about 600 or 700 square miles on fire. And within 20 to 30 minutes, all of those fires would coalesce into a single gigantic firestorm. There would be no escape from it, so all the people there would perish. So the US, with, say, hundreds of nuclear weapons on Chinese cities, well, when you combine all the smoke from these nuclear weapons detonating, it actually creates millions of tons of smoke, black carbon smoke, will rise above cloud level into the stratosphere. It's heated by the sun. It acts like a solar collector. And that smoke, because of that, will stay there for 10 years or longer. And what the smoke does is it blocks warming sunlight from reaching the surface of the Earth. And it becomes so cold in a matter of just a couple of weeks that the temperatures will fall below freezing every day for 1 to 3 years. And it will become too cold to grow food crops for at least 10 years or longer.
I mean, there's like a total disconnect with the changing world. You have a giant rising power, in this case China. Why would you expect a giant rising power to not want to have more control over its destiny? What we should be doing, in my view, is trying to cultivate a sense of friendship and cooperation, and we can have our differences with them. If we think they're doing something in trade that we don't like, let's have it out with them. But this saber rattling is the worst thing we can possibly do.
It is time to show the whole world that America is back, bigger and better and stronger than ever before. We don't have victories anymore. We used to have victories, but we don't have them. When was the last time anybody saw us beating, let's say, China in a trade deal? They kill us. We can't continue to allow China to rape our country, and that's what they're doing. It's the greatest theft in the history of the world.
The new president, Donald Trump, has a problem with China. The urgent question now is, will Trump continue with the provocations revealed in this film and take us all to the edge of war?
There never have been two countries more interdependent on each other than China and the U.S. in history. And China is the largest trading nation in the world and in history. So China's economy and their society and their lives are linked to the entire world, including America and the West and all the other countries. So I think interdependence between these two countries and among all the nations of the world speak to peace.
We don't have to accept the word of those who conjure up threats and false enemies that justify the business and profit of war if we recognize there is another superpower. And that's us, ordinary people everywhere, like the people of Okinawa, Jeju Island, the Marshall Islands, China, the United States. By speaking out, they deliver a warning to all of us. Can we really afford to be silent?
We'll meet again. Don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day. Keep smiling through, just like you always do, till the blue skies drive the dark clouds far away. So will you please say hello to the folks that I know? Tell them I won't be long. They'll be happy to know that as you saw me go, I was singing this song. We'll meet again, don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day. We'll meet again, don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day. Keep smiling through,
us out on the street thinks everybody should understand that killing don't stop killing very good. I don't care how it started, don't matter anymore, 'cause no amount of killing's gonna even up the score. No more war, no more war, until they stop that killing. We'll be here by the door till everybody's singing, no more war. We know why they do it, making war that is. They make a lot of money off of the war biz. They say it's the price of freedom. We know that's a lie. They just like to make money, don't care how many die. No more war, no more war. Tell Congress and the President, no more war. Until they stop that killing, we'll be here by the door till everybody's singing, no more war. And it's not just the people suffering the loss, 200 species every day going with the albatross. The air, food, soil, and water, we've got to share it all. And any war upon the earth is a war upon us all.